Hello, America. Judge Napolitano here in for Glenn today. Tonight, the budget battle gets nasty. The White House is now warning that if Republicans get their way on spending cuts, senior citizens could see their Medicare payments blocked and their Social Security checks delayed. This after about a dozen Democratic senators defected from their party's spending plan to join Republican senators pushing for deeper spending cuts. But neither the Democrats' plan nor the two plans offered by the Republicans seriously address our nation's spending crisis. Now, nobody wants to see Grandma and Grandpa starve in the streets. And of course, the Republican proposal would not do that. But the military, plus the nation's entitlements, including the sacred cows such as Social Security and Medicare, must be reformed if our country is to get its fiscal house in order. We are broke. What will happen if we don't get our fiscal house in order? If we don't stop borrowing? Add to all this, the world's biggest bond fund just dumped all of its U.S. debt. Jobless claims are coming in, and they're rising. And we only have one more week to go until we hit a budget deadline, meaning the government can't spend any more money. What will happen to the debt ceiling when we reach that next month? Do Republicans have the solution to getting spending under control? All right. Who better to address all this than Republican Congressman Ron Paul of Texas? He's a member of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman Paul, it's a pleasure. Welcome to the Glenn Beck program. So the Dow is down 228 points. The president just borrowed $223 billion in the month of February. Democrats in the Senate are abandoning the president and their own leadership. Who in the Congress takes seriously the abyss that we are facing, called bankruptcy, called $14 trillion in debt?
I think there's probably about 12 of us that really care about it and would cut the way we have to, and we don't have any clout, really. So I'm not very optimistic about what's going to happen on the short run. They can argue back and forth. I think they'll limp along and maybe have another CR and something like that, but it's just a situation that is overwhelming. The fact that the economy gets weaker, they pretend that there is not a weak economy and that we have employment improving and there's no inflation, but I don't think the people believe that anymore. But I don't see an answer on the horizon. We have to change our whole attitude. We have to change our attitude about policing the world and the welfare state and perpetual entitlements, and I just don't see it.
Is there any pressure on, we'll talk about the House side for now, where you sit. Is there any pressure on Republican leadership to confront reality? Pressure perhaps from Tea Party folks like yourselves, without whose presence Mr. Boehner would be Minority Leader Boehner rather than Speaker Boehner. Does he see any need to react to the small government wishes of the people who sent him there?
Well, I think he's aware of it and he moves in that direction, but let's say we put more pressure on him. He can't even get $6 billion cuts, you know, on some of these continuing resolutions. And then if you go up to 60, you're talking about a need to, the national debt's going up this year $2 trillion. So even with a little more pressure, it just doesn't happen. And you have to face the Senate and the conferences and the president. It is out of control. It's on autopilot. And we're going to march right off the cliff, and we're going to have a much worse financial crisis dealing with the dollar in the near future.
How bad will it be? What will happen if we march off the cliff? What will occur if we can't pay our debts? What will happen if 50% of tax revenue goes to debt service?
Well, I don't think it'll even get that far along. I think something will happen where the dollar will be rejected. Now, you mentioned the one company rejecting and selling all the Treasury bills, Gross, I guess it was, that did that. But, you know, interest rates didn't go up. Somebody else bought them. The Chinese bought them. So it's in their interest to try to protect the dollar well. So they keep limping along, but eventually that won't happen. Interest rates are going to skyrocket. Prices are going to go up. Prices are already going up. And standard of living is going to go down. We've lived way beyond our mean, and we're destined to live beneath our means as a nation.
Before I let you go, Congressman, what is the thought on Capitol Hill about the potential for military involvement in the crisis in Libya? The comments made in the past 24 hours by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and by her counterparts in London and in Paris and other NATO countries seem to give the impression that the president is contemplating some type of military action. Can we really afford to be physically present in yet another Muslim country in the Middle East on top of the 2 which we already occupy?
Yeah, no, there's no way we can afford it. That's what convinces me that they're living in outer space to think that we can. I gave a little 5-minute speech today on that very subject. I want to introduce a resolution next week, a sense of Congress, that the president can't do this without congressional approval. I mean, why does the Congress just always defer to the president and let the president do what he wants and spread the war? The wars keep spreading, and they're oblivious to the seriousness because it is foreign policy that so often drives great nations to their knees. They just get overextended, and it leads to the bankruptcy, and that means the destruction of the dollar.
Congressman Ron Paul, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The Government Accountability Office, known better as the GAO, says we're wasting billions of dollars a year in overlapping expenditures. Yet Congress can't agree on how much spending to cut. What needs to happen to get our economy back on track? David Walker is the founder and CEO of the Comeback America Initiative. He's also a former Comptroller General for the Government Accountability Office. Mr. Walker, welcome to the Glenn Beck program.
Good to be back, Judge.
Well, how bad is the situation? Congressman Paul, who was just on with us, says we're facing an abyss, and most people in the government don't even recognize that.
Look, right now, the Congress is arguing over whether to cut $10 billion or $60 billion or something in between when we have a deficit of $1.5 to $1.6 trillion. They're arguing about the bar tab on the Titanic. They're only talking about 12% of federal spending. They're not talking about entitlement programs. They're not talking about the need for comprehensive tax reform.
Right.
The real battle is going to be over the debt ceiling limit.
Right.
We need to do something meaningful with regard to budget controls and citizen education engagement on that.
Would it be advisable, and I think it would be, but challenge me if you disagree or support me if you agree, for the Republicans in the House simply to say, no, Mr. President, we are not going to raise the debt ceiling. We're not going to let you borrow any more money. You collect about $200 billion. You know the number better than anybody on the planet, Mr. Walker. You collect about $200 billion a month in revenue. Manage the government on that. That's what we hired you to do.
That would not be a good idea because the debt ceiling limit is paying for past sins. Look, we could have a partial shutdown and Social Security checks can go out on time, Medicare payments are going to be made, but once you hit the debt ceiling limit, it's a different story. And the fact is that what we ought to do is raise it, but raise it in exchange for larger spending cuts over a 3-year period of time.
But David, you once monitored the nation's spending, so you know of what you speak. You must also know that these promises mean nothing. That if you let the government borrow and spend, you don't even find out what they borrowed and spent until after they've borrowed and spent it, unless it's in the Constitution or unless there's absolutely no lawful authority to borrow and spend. They'll just go ahead and do it.
Well, the things that are driving the deficits are primarily the mandatory spending programs. There's no question about that. And that's not what Congress is talking about. And so let's keep our eye on the ball. Let's reach an agreement to cut more than the Republicans are talking about, but over a longer period of time. You can't do it as fast.
All right.
Let's raise the debt ceiling limit, but in exchange for budget controls and a meaningful citizen education engagement effort.
How?
And look, PIMCO dropped investments in U.S. securities today.
And somebody else bought them.
Well, but the yield is too low for the interest rate risk. There's significant interest rate risk as well as dollar risk over time.
All right. Would you agree with me on this, Mr. Former Comptroller General, that we need to cut more than just waste? The government is filled with waste and duplicative programs. This is part of what your organization teaches America about. We need to cut into the core of what the government spends, that there should be no sacred cow, not Social Security, not Medicare, not the Defense Department. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Everything's got to be on the table. Everybody's got to be at the table. The federal government has promised too much and waited too long to restructure. It's based largely on the 1950s. We cannot afford and sustain where we are.
All right. Now, David, it is easy for you and me to say this because our jobs and our livelihoods do not depend on the popularity of us with our constituents. Question. We only have about 30 seconds. Is there enough understanding and is there enough courage on members of Congress to recognize the hard choices, the hard decisions that need to be made and need to be made now?
No. The fact is we need to put budget controls in as part of the debt ceiling limit, as well as a citizen education engagement effort, so that the electorate is more informed and so they can start making these tough choices no later than 2013 without losing their jobs, because now we have more people concerned with keeping their job than doing their job.
All right. When you come back, we'll talk to you about Come Back America. We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be with you, Judge.
Our economy is on track to reach the debt ceiling as soon as April 15th, next month. In the meantime, Congress needs to come up with a budget plan to keep Washington operating past next Friday, 8 days from today. It's time to stop spending and start cutting. My next guests agree with me on that. Congressman Jason Chaffetz of Utah, Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama. Gentlemen, welcome to the Glenn Beck program. Senator Sessions, to you first. Will you vote against raising the debt ceiling so as to force the president, to force the federal government to live within its means?
I'm not going to vote to increase the debt limit unless we have substantial reforms, as Mr. Walker said, to guarantee that we're bringing down the reckless level of spending that we're incurring.
Congressman Chaffetz, do you believe any promises that the White House may make, any offers that it may give, that it won't borrow and won't spend more, but just give them the authority to do it anyway? You and I have been through this many times. Each time we talk, the federal government seems to have less and less credibility.
Oh, the president has no credibility on this issue. We racked up, in the last 29 days, more than $220 billion in the red. That's how much was added to our national debt. So I cannot vote for a continuing resolution that is going to be cut somewhere between what the Democrats have suggested in the Senate of $4 or $5 billion and $61 billion. That ain't good enough. We got a crisis in this country. We're paying $600 million a day in interest on our debt. We can't live within our means. We got to cut. And I've seen no will in this body to actually do that.
Senator Sessions, is there any will amongst the Republican leadership in the Senate to support the proposals of Senator Rand Paul, which is $500 billion a year for 3 or 4 years? I mean, that would, of course, bring us back to zero, because the president wants to borrow $1.5 trillion. Or is there enough support amongst Republicans and Democrats in the Senate for a balanced budget amendment? Or is this hopeless? Are we on a treadmill which will never stop running?
It's not hopeless. We have got to take action. As we've been told by every expert that's testified to us, this is not an imaginary crisis. It's very real. The first thing that's before us now is this continuing resolution to fund the government. The least we should do is what the House proposed, a $61 billion reduction. That'll amount to about $850 over 10 years. But it is not the end. It's just the beginning. And if we don't do that, I think it shows that this Congress is not prepared to do even the most minimal thing necessary to create financial stability.
Congressman Chaffetz, is the ball back in the court, so to speak, of the House of Representatives? And if it is, we have 8 days to go before the government can't spend a nickel. Are we just going to get another 2-week extension and another 2-week extension, making the Congress look more and more ridiculous? No business could be managed that way, and no household could be managed that way. And we're talking about the biggest business on the planet, the federal government of the United States.
Well, the lack of certainty is part of what's happening to the business economy and why we lack jobs. We need certainty in this country. We don't know what the health care plan is going to look like. In fact, we ought to repeal Obamacare. We don't have to have certainty on taxes. We don't even have certainty on the budget for the next few months. And so if we're going to have some little paltry cut here that is just a minimal, $4 billion for 2 weeks, we aren't solving the problem. So there is less and less of an appetite here, particularly with the House Republicans, to continue on in this vein. You had the president's point person over in Europe. They don't seem to be focused on this issue. We got some serious and dramatic cutting to do. There is no other choice. Our debt is approaching 100% of our gross domestic product. You can't do that.
Senator